Perfection is no longer a prerequisite. God loves you. God loves you. God loves you. He weaves messy, mistake-prone people into his family. Welcome back to the NIV Application Bible Podcast. Man, we've had fun, haven't we? And we've already finished the whole Old Testament canon, and here we are at the beginning of the New Testament, the Gospel according to Matthew. The word gospel comes from the Greek word evangelion. It means the good news. And to really get why this is good news, you got to get a little bit of the context of Matthew's audience. You know, Matthew was one of the 12 disciples. You may not know that his audience, as he began to preach and teach, was primarily a Jewish audience. So before I read this very beginning of Matthew's good news story, I want you to imagine a bunch of men and women and maybe some kids sit in a semicircle, listen to Matt preach, and they're Jewish, which means they've been taught that they have to perfectly follow 613 rules in Torah. They've been taught you have to be perfect in order to be accepted into a relationship with Yahweh, the only true God. Matthew's trying to explain, because of Jesus, perfection is no longer a prerequisite to be reconciled into a relationship with God. Faith in Jesus is what you need. And he starts the story this way. So just imagine they're sitting there thinking, we've got to be perfect. You know, surely the women are wearing some ancient version of Spanx, and the men are wearing their dress pants. And Matthew begins the sermon like this. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. I'm going to stop right there because I know you're not encouraged yet. Let me tell you, that first century Jewish audience was. Because by beginning the family tree of Jesus like this, he has just succeeded in shocking them, because he's woven women into the genealogy of God's Son. First of all, in this era, women are never included in genealogies. I mean, even though they had their babies without epidurals or ice chips, women are not mentioned in genealogies. Matthew includes five women, and these aren't like good girls either. He weaves women into the family tree of Jesus who were wild girls. He starts with Tamar. So here's the gist of Tamar's story. She has married Judah's eldest son. Judah's a big deal. He's one of the patriarchs of Israel, one of the 12 tribes. So Tamar marries into this, pretty impressive family, and she marries the oldest son of Judah. Well, the oldest son goes cray-cray, and so God kills him for his behavior. And so based on their culture, she is woven into what we would now call levirate marriage. She marries Judah's second eldest son. And he's a nutter too, and so he gets killed in the story. Well, then she's promised to marry Judah's third son, a boy named Shelah. This is all in Genesis, if you want to follow along and know that I'm telling the truth of this genealogy. And so while she's promised to marry Judah's third boy, Judah says, why don't you go on back home, because he hasn't gone through puberty yet, but when he goes through puberty, I'll text you and you can come marry him, taking the smallest bit of liberty with the Hebrew there. But that's the story in the Old Testament. And so she starts thinking, this doesn't bode well for me. 2 of Judah's sons have already died while married to me. I bet you he changes his mind and doesn't let me marry Shayla. So she takes matters into her own hands. That's a common theme in the Old Testament. She disguises herself as a prostitute, and she engages in intimacy with her father-in-law, with Judah, and then she gets pregnant. Well, the women in her town do what I've known women to do, and they disguise gossip as a prayer request, and they come before Judah and they go, Judah, 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 we've got to pray. Because remember your daughter-in-law, Tamar, she's gone out and gotten herself pregnant. She's not just a little bit pregnant either. She's pregnant with twins. And Judah goes, oh man, that's such a bummer. We're going to have to kill her. Because that was what happened in ancient culture if a woman got pregnant outside of the bounds of marriage. And so Tamar comes before Judah and says, hey, and he says, it's good to see you again. I'm so sorry we're going to have to kill you. In this context, they were going to burn her. And she says, not so fast, big boy. Now, this is not the exact way the NIV Application Bible reads, but this is the story from Genesis. She says, I'm pregnant with your children. That's Tamar's story. This isn't a good girl. This girl's wild. And she's the first girl in the family tree of Jesus. He goes on to talk about Rahab. Rahab didn't disguise herself as a lady of the evening. She's a card-carrying member. Then we get to Ruth. We've already talked about Ruth. So, Ruth was faithful, but you've got to go all the way back to Ruth's family tree to realize her roots go all the way back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you remember Sodom and Gomorrah, kind of the original Vegas? What happened in Sodom and Gomorrah stayed in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so God said, I'm going to pour out my wrath on this evil city. And before he poured out his wrath, there was one good guy living in Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember his name? It was Lot. And so Lot escapes Sodom and Gomorrah before God pours out his wrath. As they're heading out of town, his wife looks back. God had only said one thing. He said, don't look back. Mrs. Lot looks back. She gets frozen into a pillar of salt. So she's the original Scary Spice. So it's only Lot and his two daughters who make it out of town to the high country. We're told in Genesis 19 that after they get to the high country, Lot's daughters go, we are alone up here. Neither one of us is going to get a date. We're probably never going to get asked to prom. So they conspired, just like Tamar had. They conspired to get their own father, Lot, inebriated. They were physically intimate with their own father. Both of those girls got pregnant. And the oldest named her baby boy Moab, which means from father, daddy's boy. Because their tribe began in incest, in the Old Testament, Moabites weren't even allowed in the tent of meeting, which is what God's people called church before it became a brick and mortar building, the temple in Jerusalem. They're not even allowed in worship. And yet here we've got Ruth, a Moabitess, in the family tree of Jesus Christ. Remember the context. You've got a bunch of Jewish people sitting around listening to the sermon. They're probably just shocked. Their hair is blown back. These girls aren't perfect. These girls have crazy chapters in their backstories. He ends by talking about Bathsheba. He doesn't even say her name. He just says this woman who was Solomon's mother. You remember Bathsheba. She and David had an affair while she was still married to Uriah the Hittite. David had him killed, so she was infamous for being an adulteress. Y'all, the great news of this story is Matthew is preaching it to a group of people who thought they had to be perfect to be reconciled to God. And what Matthew says is perfection is no longer a prerequisite. God loves you. God loves you. God loves you. He weaves messy, mistake-prone people into his family. When I first brought Missy home from Haiti, I used nicknames all the time. And during the adoption process, I called her Scooter McTutor. Called her a bunch of other names, but I called her Scooter McTutor the most often. And maybe a week after I brought her home to Nashville, we were in the grocery store, and a woman said, "What's your name, honey?" She knew our story, and Missy looked up. She could barely speak English, and she said, "Missy." And the woman said, "What's your last name?" And Missy said, McTuda. I said, baby, your last name isn't McTutor. Your last name is Harper. You're a Harper. You're my daughter. Matthew 1. The whole takeaway is, regardless of your backstory, if you've put your hope in Jesus, you're an image bearer. You're in the family of God. Perfection is not a prerequisite to be reconciled with God the Father. Faith in Jesus is, here's the application. The covenantal promise includes all humanity. Matthew shows us that we have another set of roots of faith. Once a person becomes a Christian, he or she is immediately adopted into a family of faith that has a long and well-documented genealogy. This isn't a rule book, y'all. This isn't even a history book, although the history in it is true. This, at its core, is a divine love story, and it's about the kind of love relationship, the kind of real relationship we can be reconciled in with the God who breathed our world into existence. If you've put your hope in Jesus, He calls you His. That's great news, isn't it?